Here we are today at the Davos Congress Centre for today's Reuters Breakingviews. With me is Reuters Breakingviews editor Hugo Dixon. We'll be looking at two stories. First of all, are we seeing signs that Angela Merkel's stance may be softening? And secondly, does the Fed action last night put pressure on the ECB to follow suit? As I say, Hugo, thanks very much for joining us. You've got a piece out today. There are maybe slight indications that Angela Merkel is more prepared to build a larger firewall to protect the Eurozone from debt contagion. Tell us more.
Well, there are some tentative signs about that, but the key point that I'm making in this piece is the interconnection between the IMF's desire for a bigger war chest itself with the desire to create a bigger war chest for the Eurozone. And essentially, up till now, Merkel has been saying no more money for the Eurozone, but we will put some money into the IMF. But the rest of the world is saying we won't put more money into the IMF unless you put more money into the Eurozone. And I think you can see some sort of compromise agreement where the Eurozone increases the size of its bailout fund, essentially by allowing the old bailout fund to run in parallel with the new bailout fund. And that would then get a sort of matching increase from the IMF, which in turn would have been partly funded by the Eurozone. It's a bit elaborate, but the maths that we're doing suggests that maybe ultimately you could assemble something like a $650 billion extra firepower, of which probably 3/4 would actually ultimately come from the Eurozone for itself.
So if I've got this correct, Germany will contribute more to the Eurozone bailout fund and contribute more to the IMF. That's going to be a hard sell to the German public, isn't it?
Well, the quid pro quo is that what they've done, I mean, this is not a deal by any stretch, but the quid pro quo would be that you've had this fiscal compact. All of the Eurozone countries will have signed up to this strict fiscal discipline.
Okay, let's move on to the Fed, and we'll touch on the ECB. The Fed, the BOJ, the Bank of England, all have zero-bound interest rates, engaging in quantitative easing for as far as the eye can see, essentially. Will the ECB be pressured to follow suit?
They clearly are being pressurised to follow suit, but it somewhat links to the previous point of what is the German position. Of course, the ECB is independent, but still it has to take into account the overall political context. And it's also keen to have this fiscal compact. And if it believes that there is enough fiscal discipline in the system, maybe it will be prepared to do more unconventional things on monetary policy. I mean, the first step is to cut the interest rate from 1% to 0.5%. Once they get down to 0.5%, if they need to do anything more, if inflation looks like it's going to undershoot their target of close to but less than 2%, which I think it might well do given the state of the Eurozone economy, it ought to, just purely, not about bailing out countries, but purely in order to stick to its mandate, it ought to do something further on monetary policy. And that further thing, after it's done another cut in interest rates, would be quantitative easing. And so that's the sort of the next level of the debate. And people around here are talking about that. And I think it's something that we'll see play out in the next couple of months.
Very quickly, something else that people here are talking about is jobs and growth. Where is it going to come from? We've spoken today to Joe Stiglitz, Barry Eichengreen. They're asking the same questions. They don't have answers. More fiscal discipline in Europe isn't going to provide the jobs and growth.
Okay, but I think that where we're coming to is, I mean, again, tentative signs that Angela Merkel will say she's got her treaty on fiscal discipline, she's got some programs in place, and she's not going to ask for yet more rounds of fiscal discipline. That doesn't in itself allow the economy to grow, but if you're no longer stamping on the economy again and again and again, at least industry can get its confidence back. If you then combine that with quantitative easing from the ECB, and then sometimes longer-term structural measures, which are hugely important for growth in the long run. They don't do much for growth in the short run. But then you could have something that looks like a growth strategy. It's not going to stop a Eurozone recession this year, but it might mean it's not terribly deep, and it might mean that next year you get sort of very anemic growth, and then, in 2 or 3 years' time you might be back to a couple of percent or something. I mean, nothing to go to the horses about, but better than what we were looking at a month ago. And I think that's the best scenario. I'm not predicting it, but I could see how the tectonic plates might shift around to something like that.
Hugo, thank you very much. That was Hugo Dixon, editor at Reuters Breakingviews. I'm Jamie McGeever, here in Davos for Reuters.